So another panel next, this time with Martin Macmillan from Mobile Finance Collective, Justin Stolzenberg from Metica, Erla Gunnhildardóttir from Fractional, Ludwig, independent, and Mariusz Gąsiewski from Google. They're going to be talking about the source of truth, navigating conflicting financial data.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for showing up to our panel on the source of truth, navigating conflicting user acquisition and financial data. I'll just give you a quick introduction. I'm Martin Macmillan, founder of the Mobile Finance Collective. We're a community, global community of CFOs and finance leads in gaming. The very potted history to the community was I'd run a lending business called Pollen VC for 10 years, and always struck me from working with hundreds and hundreds of CFOs over 10 years that very often, well, there was no community for CFOs. There was lots of community if you work in user acquisition or in ad monetization, but basically nothing in finance. So that's where the sort of community idea was born from, and we launched about 8 months ago. And growing really nicely. So we're teasing out some super interesting insights across the communities. So in this panel today, we got a very interesting group of panelists who I'll let introduce themselves in a moment, with a bunch of different experiences and viewpoints on the topic. And this topic within our community is something that has come up a number of times over the last few months in a number of different guises. So we thought it would make an interesting take, because whether you're on the UA side or the finance side, there is it raises some sort of deeper questions within within the sort of wider context of how everyone's communicating with each other and so on as well. So without further ado, I will introduce you, or let the panel introduce you, introduce themselves, and then we can get into it from there. Should we just go down the line?
All right. Yeah, my name is Justin. Background of game operation, product monetization, analytics, and marketing. Since 2002, browser and mobile gaming. And more recently, I run an AI startup that personalizes in-app experiences in real time and grows lifetime value, and then pushes all that back to networks to target better.
Hello, Mariusz Gąsiewski from Google. I will actually look at that from three perspectives. One is like I work with top clients of Google from Central Eastern Europe, so I will talk from the perspective of someone who works with big companies. But for many years I was working with a lot of startups and startup initiatives at Google, so I was working with many like mobile gaming studios. And the third thing is like, I'm angel in many projects, so I'm looking at that from the perspective of someone who is paying for something, so then like looking at what it means in the reality.
Yeah, hi. I'm Erla Gunnhildardóttir, and I work as a fractional CFO in the gaming industry and also as an independent board member. I was, prior to taking this role on, I was head of FP&A both at Supercell and also at CCP Games.
Awesome. Ludwig, I've been in the industry for 20 years, mobile games industry. I was CFO and COO at Glue Mobile in the States, public company, grew it from $10 million to $700 million, and we sold it to EA about 3 years ago for $2.5 billion. And now I've started a game studio in India, kind of low-cost offshore outsourcing.
Cool. So lots of experience, lots of insights to share. So I thought it'd be interesting to start with, we talked about this idea of conflicting data between multiple different sources and so on, and that as we'll unravel can manifest itself in a number of different ways. So we thought it would be interesting maybe to just start down the line with some empirical examples, if you like, or context about how conflicting data can lead to real-life results or misinterpretations or so on. So basically, stories from the trenches, would probably be the best way to do it. Should we just go down the line, Justin? You.
I would call out maybe two examples that I encountered in the previous company that I co-founded. That was an M&A business where I looked at 50-odd studios a year. It was a really jarring experience because the studio was enthusiastic when they showed us their numbers about user acquisition. But when looking at it more closely, They had just switched their MMP. They did not import their attributions, and it turns out that if you look at UA only through what's in the MMP under the attribution date, that is not necessarily reflecting your actual user base growth. And so they overspent to the order of magnitude of $1 million a month for a couple of months, and unfortunately went out of business. And personally, that breaks my heart.
Actually, I can share a few stories. Like one is, for example, the studio that, when we're having RPG games, and with very loyal audience, and they were kind of looking at the very basic data, but finally, what actually founders were expecting extremely unrealistic results. Like they were expecting to have more than 100% 100% ROAS on day 30 in RPG game. So finally, nothing was really can be made. But on the other side, for example, there was the startup that I invested in as the angel, and they were 1 month they were spending 20,000, another month they're 40,000, because they were not really looking at what is the actual, for example, cost of the UA, what is the cost of people who were hired there, what is the cost of creatives, what is really the true cost, and finally actually when they hired CFO even for a few hours per week. Actually, someone put that on order and actually create them really nice plan. Okay, how much they should spend to really grow the value of the company, how it should be done in the way that they could be sold in 4 years. Yeah. So, but of course, I saw the cases when people were overspending quite heavily, adding some unrealistic key factors, for example, from the organic, or not understanding how to actually compare the cohorts, because on one side someone just got the budget for the UA, and then the budget was kind of created for the whole 6 months, but meantime the situation in the company changed, so actually the same even ROAS on 1 month totally different perspective of the financial situation of the company 3 months later.
Yeah, so I'm going to take the perspective from finance, so that's my viewpoint here, and from strategic finance. So the difference in the seriousness of conflicting data and how it gets used is very different if it's an indie studio, or if it's small, or if it's more mature. There are different problems that you're tackling. I have an example of a rather young studio, still 60 people working there, and they had a good game out there. Golden Cohort was great. They were really on the rise. They had a good game out there, and when they're looking at the data, and they're using inputs from their UA channels to factor in, okay, actually what's the lifetime value of our players, and what can we expect to be the payback period, and how much can we invest? These are serious conversations you need to, and decisions you need to make. And what happens is that they thought they had a runway, so a cash runway. If just to explain what a runway is in normal terms, it's how much can the company live on the cash that you have in your bank. And you make revenue projections, right? And so they expected the runway to be about 18 months. But then something really weird was happening. They're investing in their UA channels, and they're expecting their revenues to continue to grow, and they had big milestones to hit. But something was just really wrong. So we go in and we start to dissect what's exactly happening. So we see from a modeling perspective, they have the right data, but it's being used wrong. So their cost per acquisition was actually factored to be 30% lower in their modeling. And they expected the lifetime value to be a lot higher and the payback period to be a lot, shorter than it actually was. This had the grave seriousness is that they thought they had a runway of 18 months. That got shortened to 8 months. So that means the studio had to make very serious and brave decisions a lot faster than they thought they had to do.
Yeah, I think data, this topic's about data and how do you use data, and finance uses data, UA uses data, studios use data, and I think you gotta really think about the inputs, the throughputs, and the outputs of the data. And this topic's about inconsistency in uses of data, and how you process the data and do the calculations is as important as the data you're getting. And an example I would give here is if we had 3 games and you ask me what's my day 30, and I say it's 10%, and you say yours is 15, you say yours is 30, of course you're going to think that his is the best game out there. But if his calculation, if his throughputs are not using the denominator of installs, it's actually Fatui complete, and if he's got huge deductions from install to Fatui complete, his 30% day 30 might be 10%, and so I think it's really important. Comparability and definitions are really important, on top of just making sure you're getting the right data and that you're processing that data correctly. And then kind of one example I'll also give would be a company I was advising. Their UA head was saying, we have a 6-month payback on our UA. I'm like, this is fantastic. Let's pour gasoline on the fire. Let's add more, because that's a great payback. And they did that, and a month later, it's like, oh, the yield curve flattened completely. There was no impact from that extra UA spend, and just didn't make sense, and it kind of went on for 6 more months. Well, it turns out later on, when they finally dug into it, the UA head, and this was a sophisticated $100 million a year revenue single game company, the UA head was using paid and organic in the denominator, not just looking at the paid. And when they stripped out the organic, it was like a 720 day, not six months, it was 2 years. So that's where definitions really matter, and making sure you're using correct definitions.
Yeah, so you can have the right data, but if you're not, it can be, or vice versa, or the wrong data used correctly, or the right data used incorrectly. So, so lots of different pitfalls in there. So the one thing then that, in talking this through and the community discussion and so on, is this idea, the way to navigate around all the different conflicts is there's potentially a part of it which is an organizational. So the idea of having not just the UA team saying, here is my model, and then everyone taking it as gospel, but for finance to be able to interrogate it, and vice versa. It's a joint effort. One of the key things, again, that's come out in the community is the intersection of finance and UA. So let you guys talk about that a little bit. But
maybe to add, I think it's, in this case, it's really important, I saw it in many companies, not only important to align on those metrics, but I think it's aligned really on the approach to the risk, because I think you have 2 points. You have risk and opportunity. Yeah. So if you put double down on one, you increasing the other one. Yeah. But on the other side, if you want to decrease the risk, very often you are decreasing the opportunity. Yeah. So if you talk about really operational and practical outcome of payback, it's very simple, yeah. The shorter the payback, the more traffic you can buy for a specific amount. So again, it's you lowering the risk, but then you are decreasing the opportunity as well. That maybe you can even lose opportunity, yeah, because you are creating new game, and you have just some time before it gets really known on the market, before other companies start to look at that and try to do something similar. Yeah. So I think it's really about how to align not only the metrics, but how to are we going heavily, making sure that we are using whole opportunity, but then of course runway can really decrease heavily, especially in those genres where the payback is longer, and then that it takes longer to actually pay back those cohorts, or when the traffic is very expensive. So either we buy a lot of traffic if we want to have enough data to optimize the ROAS campaigns, or we don't do at all, because there is nothing between.
Risk reward is interesting, and part of it is down to stage, right? In terms of can the company afford to take the risk, or is it are you basically betting the farm on some kind of UA trade? But Justin, predicting and modeling LTVs and so on is having some certainty to do that is a topic I know that's close to your heart.
So if I reflect on my own journey from very hands-on performance marketing to then a pretty scaled organization across 8 studios, one thing I had to learn is that operational people, product marketing teams often live on a completely different time dimension compared to our finance colleagues. We think in cohort lifetimes, and finance lives in calendar time. And those don't align easily. And so if I have a crude forecasting model that uses kind of calendar slices of monthly size, for example, that is hard to translate into how will my January cohort then unfold in January, February, March revenues and my cash flows. And so where then tools have become much more easy to use is today you can just go and upload your cohort data to ChatGPT and ask, make me, if it's daily granularity, make me a calendar-based revenue pivot on that data. And that will then help you understand, okay, it takes a long time for the revenue to unfold and become cash, so I think I'm 6 months profitable, but the cash is coming in month 8. That creates empathy. So to me, definitions are crucial. The correct data instrumentation is crucial. And then working towards each other, trying to speak the same language and understanding the different time dimensions is the next layer on top of how to treat, if I have correct data, how to treat it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think what are this side of the panel, where the finance people, what are the biggest things we do with data? It's about resource allocation for headcount deployments and for user acquisition deployments. And the last panel, which I wasn't here for, but about fundraising and how much runway do you have. Those are the lifeblood of a studio. And so, being able to accurately compare internal games, whether it's for launch, you're in beta, and are we going to launch? We're in beta, and are we going to deploy a lot of capital to launch, or are we going to deploy a little bit of capital to launch, and do we trust the data? Or I've got 3 titles for this quarter, and I can only afford to spend $2 million, whatever the numbers are. How am I going to allocate that amongst my 3 titles? These are all resource allocations. Or I've got 3 teams begging for 5 more headcount each. How do I go about doing that? So when I was at Glue, it was really important for us to have standard definitions across every title and every studio so that we spoke from the same language. And then secondly would be on M&A. So that's another use of capital, is when I'm looking at companies. We acquired 18 companies in my 18 years at Glue. We diligenced probably 200 companies. We were very, very acquisitive. And having definitions that I could look at the data and say, I can compare this company's data and feel confident that I can trust that data, or internally, this is all why definitions are so important.
I think maybe like one more aspect, I totally agree on the resource allocation, because it's like, it depends a lot where a studio is at its maturity. And typically, companies, they have constraints. You have constraints on your cash, and you need to make an informed decision. It's not only UA that needs to be used. You have other methods as well. You have community, you have branding, creator economies as well, creator programs. Like, there are many other ways to create value and actually drive revenue and growth. It's not only UA, although it's the most popular one in particular with mobile games. And what I wanted to kind of share is that you're always making decisions on those constraints. And relating back to the topic of like data and conflicting sources, from a kind of leadership point of view, it creates tremendous noise if there's not alignment there. And what does this noise do? It just takes a lot of time to kind of get to a place of understanding and a baseline and actually make a really good informed choice. How much are we allocating in UA, in branding, in marketing, creatives, and like everything else, and headcount? So that's my 2 cents.
I think it's super important. The message that keeps coming out is this importance to all be on the same page. So whether it's organizationally, you've got an understanding of an appreciation of each other's business. Again, it's not all about UA, but the biggest kind of misunderstanding that, again, empirically I've seen in 10 years is UA not understanding finance, and particularly finance not understanding UA. Some of that's due to an organizational kind of silo or a kind of like an artificial thing imposed there. But the thing we keep coming back to is a set of definitions. So everyone's on the same page, and the way to, or a very helpful way to avoid misinterpretation is to write it down, right? So you've got a standard set of definitions. Now, that obviously has impact on an internal base, just in terms of everyone talking to each other, but then also on an external basis as well. So one of the things we've teased out and we're putting a little bit of work into is, having spoken to some of the M&A guys as well, how many people pitch up with an M&A data room saying, here's our standard set of definitions? Virtually none, even for some really big transactions. So one thing we've figured out is as a piece of diligence that CFOs or whoever's leading the finance function or UA should be doing is they should be owning that kind of that document, right? So you guys have seen loads of, 18 of them, Eric, you probably chalked up more than anyone else here.
Yeah, you're talking now about data that's confidential or inside the company that's trying to get sold. I'll use an example just of public data and how if you are diligent, you can use public data to your advantage. So Glue in 2016, there was a company called CrowdStar. They had a game called Covet Fashion, which is doing about $50 million a year. They had a game in beta called Design Home, and it was in Canada. Anybody could have looked at the data on App Annie at the time and looked at it, and they were trying to sell the company for the better part of a year. We looked at that Canada beta data, public data, that wasn't company definitions, it was just App Annie data, and we saw that data was spectacular. We knew that game was going to be a hit, and nobody else was looking at that data at that time. We ultimately bought the company for $45 million. So they were doing about $45 million on Covet. Design Home wasn't launched. We bought the company for $45 million. 2 weeks after we acquired the company, they launched Design Home, did $100 million the first year, did $200 million the second year, did about $250 million the third year. I would argue that probably 70% of the $2.5 billion we got when we sold the company to Electronic Arts came from those two titles, and that was using public data that other people weren't looking at the time, and we used it. It was a phenomenal, probably a top acquisition in the industry. But it's about data.
Data. So understanding it, using it correctly, understanding everyone else's kind of point of view. We talked a little bit about this idea of very often the kind of UA teams are kind of the gods, and the finance is seen as more of a kind of service function, which is A, wrong, but B, changing. And this idea of the finance business partner, do you want to maybe elaborate a little bit on what you've seen there and how that can work? More of a best practice tip, really.
Yeah, so every single function inside a company has its own viewpoint, right? We learn something and we use different types of data, but there are different viewpoints. And from when people typically think about finance, you think about accounting and regulations and annual reports. That doesn't sound really sexy, does it? But there's a lot of knowledge to be shared, and there's a lot of power in involving finance with the operations as well. That's where strategy comes into play. So one method how to strengthen the leadership of a studio is actually to implement something called finance business partnering. And this stems from the idea that these different viewpoints coming together and creating strengthened alliance. So finance having a say and having actually a partner in every single function. So for UA, typically, and that's one of the things that I've been doing in my work, is to triangulate and work really closely with UA to really understand all the drivers behind there, so that when someone comes and asks us, hey, should we actually invest more into our user acquisition channel? Should we do it differently? We can bring a perspective from financial allocation into that decision making. And we also do it in terms of headcount planning and any kind of strategic planning. And obviously, this becomes increasingly more important as a best practice as the studio matures. And I would say a pivoting point for someone to have a system up and running like this is definitely when you have headcount maybe around 200, you're opening up maybe different offices in different countries, and you already have one title out, or maybe you're opening up another one. That's exactly the point where this becomes very efficient and useful.
Martin, I've got one topic I think is really important. This is call it trust but verify. I grew up in a stage where studios were the gods, and then UA became the gods. But we at Glue and a lot of other companies have a separation of church and state when it comes to UA dollars. So you have a studio team that's building a game for a year or 2 years or whatever it is. We never gave them any allocation of UA that they controlled. They had to prove as they were going into alpha and beta that their title held up to the metrics that we thought was worthwhile to then give them funding when they wanted to go past beta and into global launch. Because a studio that's worked on a game for 2 years, if you gave them $1 million, they're going to spend $1 million, even if the metrics are terrible. And that's where I think it's really important to let those UA gods have the studio gods kind of trust but verify and make sure they don't
there's this sort of natural bias, right? You must see also there's a natural bias to wanting it to succeed, and
Yeah, but I think it's like again it's coming from different motivation, because finally the mobile gaming especially is defined by the growth. Yeah, so it's very easy even to compare what is the valuation of the company that is growing versus that is not. Yeah, which is like either you grow as the company or you have the problem and the value is much lower. So in this case again the purpose of the growth team is really to grow the company, and of course, on the other side, the financial side is really to make it secure way. Yeah, so that's why again,
profitable growth, right?
Profitable growth. Yeah, but again, that's again we coming to those definitions here, what it means to have profitable growth, yeah, what it means because it can mean different things for different people, and again, it can mean different things for different people if we talk about different timing, yeah, because again, depending if we take 3 years, 5 years, or 1 year, that will be meaning different actions for the people.
Yeah, horizons is definitely, I think the big takeaway for everyone, definitions, is if you had to sum up this panel in one shot. Guys, we have a couple of minutes left. Maybe whilst we've got these guys here, if there are any questions from the panel. I don't know if we've got a roving mic, thanks.
So you're all talking about definitions, right? And the thing is, where do we get those definitions to be aligned with the rest of the world, so to say? That's kind of like the question, where do we get those definitions?
So we're working on a set of, not in any way intended to be like industry definitions, but a framework of definitions that you should have yourself, even if you take them and morph them and adjust them and all the rest of it, just basically like a straw man to say, here's the sorts of things we need to think about, just to use as a community resource for folks. So stay tuned.
But at a minimum, if you're a studio that has more than one game team, you need to have consistency. To acquire somebody, you need consistency on that acquired company to make sure you're all talking from the same page. Whether my definitions are slightly different than Erla's, that's less important, but having internal.
Yeah, but I think it can even start earlier. Like let's see in UA, even in UA, you still don't have very always the consistent definitions. Yeah, let's see engaged view, for example, for conversions means a little bit different at Google and Facebook and in TikTok. Yeah, Facebook and Google is 10 seconds, for example. In TikTok is 6 seconds. Yeah, and in Meta is if it's less than 10 seconds, it's 97% of the movie. In Google is 100%. Yeah, so there are those slight differences, and it really starts from understanding those differences and how they can really influence the data. Yeah, because finally, once you start from that side, you know what is kind of this in this UA picture. So then you can get to the point when you align with these financial people, and you understand what is the more or less the maybe not final output, but at least range of those outputs.
Cool. I think we're probably out of time, but if anyone is, feel free to come and kind of badger us after the session, or if anyone's interested in, would like to find out more about the community, please just reach out directly to me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best thing. Hopefully that's been some useful takeaways for you guys, because it does touch, this topic touches a lot of very different areas within a studio. So quick round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.